This video is brought to you by Nebula. For the past few months, European leaders have been fretting about how a new Trump administration might treat Ukraine, worrying that his stated ambition to end the war on day one would basically mean abandoning Kiev to the whims of the Kremlin. However, a week into Trump's second term, and not only is Ukraine yet to be abandoned, but in the past few days, the new president has sounded conspicuously hawkish on the issue. On Wednesday, in a post on Truth Social, Trump threatened further sanctions on Russia's failing economy unless Putin agreed to a peace deal. And then on Thursday, in his freewheeling address to the World Economic Forum at Davos, he demanded the Saudis bring down global oil prices to put further pressure on the Kremlin's war machine, blamed Russia for holding up peace talks, and asked China's President Xi to help him sort a deal. So in this video, we're going to have a look at Trump's pro-Ukraine pivot and whether it'll work. Explore which world leaders are winning and which are losing every week with our new podcast, The World Leader Leaderboard. Find it over on the TLDR Podcast YouTube channel or in your favourite podcast app. So let's start with a bit of context. As we've argued in previous videos, there's always been a bit of ambiguity to Trump's Ukraine policy. While he pledged on multiple occasions during the campaign that he'd do a deal in short time, even claiming at one point that he'd be able to do it on day one, this always felt implausible. Given that, well, the Kremlin had shown little interest to negotiate. How Trump would persuade Putin to the negotiating table has always been a bit unclear. Ukraine and its allies in Europe worried that Trump would achieve this by just offering Putin lots of unpalatable concessions, essentially abandoning Ukraine. But there were signs that Trump might not be as pro-Putin as his detractors assumed. In a 2023 interview with Fox News, for instance, Trump said he'd actually step up support for Ukraine to force Russia to acquiesce.
I would tell Zelensky, no more, you got to make a deal. I would tell Putin, if you don't make a deal, we're going to give them a lot. We're going to give them more than they ever got if we have to. I will have the deal done in one day. One day.
It's also worth saying that, even if Trump isn't Ukraine's biggest fan, it was always hard to imagine him ever agreeing to a deal so bad that it made America look weak, or like they'd in some sense lost. And Axios reported in November that Zelensky felt, quote, reassured after his first post-election call with Trump and Elon Musk. Anyway, over the past few days, there have been more and more signs that Trump is going to be significantly more pro-Ukraine than expected. The first real hint we got came on Wednesday, when in a post on Truth Social, Trump said that while he, quote, loves the Russian people and always had a very good relationship with President Putin, unless the Kremlin agreed to settle now, he would have no choice but to put high levels of taxes, tariffs and sanctions on anything being sold by Russia. In that post, Trump referenced the ongoing weakness in the Russian economy, which he described as failing and which he clearly sees as Putin's weak spot. For context, despite ridiculously steep interest rate hikes, inflation in Russia has continued to rise and actually reached a new peak of 9.5% year on year in December. Unsurprisingly, this has become a source of anxiety within the Kremlin, and on Thursday, Reuters claimed in an exclusive report that Putin, who first became popular by resuscitating the economy in the 2000s, has grown increasingly concerned about distortions in Russia's wartime economy. While we might be sceptical of the idea that further sanctions could have much additional impact, after all, the West has been escalating sanctions against Russia since the war began in early 2022, the Iranian experience in 2018 suggests that there might be more to go. For context, in 2018, Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, or JCPOA, and instead decided to implement the harshest sanctions it could think of as part of what Trump called a maximum pressure campaign. While these sanctions didn't stop the Iranians from continuing to develop a nuke, or really change Iranian foreign policy, and they were resisted by many of Trump's European allies, they did cripple the Iranian economy. Only China continued to import Iranian crude, which meant that the Iranian rial collapsed, inflation spiked, and Iran's foreign exchange reserves were almost exhausted by 2020. Anyway, a day after his post on Truth Social, Trump gave a speech at Davos, where he said he was going to ask Saudi Arabia and OPEC, the international cartel of oil-producing states, to bring down the cost of oil, both because lower oil costs will mean lower interest rates, and because, in Trump's words,
if the price came down, the Russia-Ukraine war would end immediately. Right now, the price is high enough that that war will continue. You got to bring down the oil price. You got to end that war.
To be fair to Trump, if he can achieve this, it's a great idea. Hydrocarbon revenues are funding Russia's war in Ukraine, and while sanctions can increase the discount at which Russia sells its oil, as long as global prices are high, the Kremlin will continue to rake in the cash. This is why sanctions have only been moderately effective so far. While they've made it somewhat harder for Russia to export its oil, Russia will always be able to find buyers eventually, and the sanctions-related disruption to international trade has pushed up global prices, at least partially offsetting any sanctions-related discount that Russia faces. Anyway, whether or not Trump can bring down global oil prices will probably depend mostly on Saudi Arabia, because the Saudis hold the most sway within OPEC, and as well as being the world's biggest oil producer, the Saudis are what's known as the world's swing producer. In other words, they're the only country that can quickly and easily ramp production up or down enough to move global prices. There's cause for optimism here. Trump seems to have a pretty cozy relationship with Saudi Arabia's de facto leader, Mohammed bin Salman, in part because he's not as fussed as Biden about the Saudis' human rights issues, and was relatively successful at keeping a lid on prices in his first term. Whenever oil prices went much above $70 a barrel during Trump's first term, he would take to Twitter to demand that OPEC increase production and bring down prices. To be fair to Trump, this seemed to work. Oil prices were below $70 a barrel for most of his first term, save for a few months in late 2018. And in the first few months of the pandemic in early 2020, he even stepped in to negotiate an oil peace between Russia and Saudi Arabia, who were engaged in a price war that was pushing prices to zero, threatening the viability of American shale producers. Later on in his Davos address, Trump also said that he hoped China's President Xi Jinping could help stop the war with Ukraine, and blamed Russia for stymieing the peace talks, saying Ukraine is ready to make a deal. Now, to stress, this doesn't mean that Trump is necessarily pro-Ukraine. Rather, it's probably more that he wants to do a deal that's both sustainable and makes America look strong. It's also worth noting that Trump's antipathy towards NATO means he'll probably force Europe to take responsibility for any post-war security guarantee. Nonetheless, Trump still looks to be more pro-Ukraine than many people expected, and this is great news for Zelensky and co. Like a lot of things, this whole situation is very much in a state of flux. With us entering a new year and Trump re-entering the White House, well, the world has felt more stable, hasn't it? Every day we're faced with weird headlines, from Trump's attempts to take over Canada and Elon's wild ride in Europe, or even Trump trying to swap New Jersey for a shiny Charizard on the playground. Okay, that last one might not be real, but we do dive into the chaotic world of US politics in our series WTF USA. That's our series where we explain everything that's happened across the pond in the land of the free. Because while the election might be over, with Trump in the Oval Office, the number of WTF moments only looks likely to increase. Unlike some of our other more serious videos, the tone of WTF USA is more light-hearted, and takes something of an irreverent look at what's going on. If you're interested, WTF can be found exclusively on Nebula. Now, if you didn't know, Nebula is an independent, creator-owned streaming platform that specializes in thoughtful content. Over there, you can find creators like Wendover Productions, Real Life Law, and Legal Eagle, with many of them releasing their very own original series on the platform. We're super proud of WTF USA, and we hope that with your support, we'll be able to make other interesting, weird, and entertaining series with Nebula in the future. So signing up genuinely helps TLDR to grow and expand. You can also watch every normal TLDR video on Nebula ad-free, and in some instances before they land on YouTube. If you're not a member already, click our link in the description to get 40% off. We really hope you check out the series, and as always, thanks for your support.